Hi, I'm Milas. My father once told me with a straight face, a girl's not worth investing in. He gave everything, our company, our future, our legacy to my brother. And me? I was the invisible one, the placeholder, the just in case. But here's the thing no one saw coming. The silence they mistook for weakness? It wasn't surrender. It was strategy. Now I ask you, when the girl they dismissed rewrites the rules, do they still call her weak, or do they finally go silent? Before we dive in, tell me, where are you listening from, and what time is it there? Drop a comment below. We're listening, because someone should be. The air in the Hargrave estate always smelled like lemon wax and expectation. It was gala day, and that meant pressed linens, crystal glasses, and my brother Paul grinning in a fresh tuxedo while our mother flitted around with a clipboard like a Broadway stage manager. As usual, I was elbow deep in a flower arrangement that wasn't my job. Not really. But no one ever asked Paul to arrange centerpieces or double-check if the heat lamps on the patio worked. He got applause. I got tape burns and thorn pricks. "Malis, make sure the ice sculpture isn't dripping on the gift table," my father barked as he passed by. Not a thank you, not a glance at the sweat matting my hairline, just that tone, the one I knew better than my own name. I didn't argue. I never did. But today, I had something. Tucked inside my jacket pocket was a folded letter, a fellowship acceptance from the Whitmore Institute at Cambridge, fully funded, prestigious. I'd been holding it in for 3 days, waiting for the right moment, waiting for something resembling peace, or maybe permission. The guests arrived around 6, one champagne flute after another, and I kept moving through them like a ghost in flats. At dinner, Paul gave a short speech about legacy and leadership, and my father clapped loudest. My name didn't come up once. Not that I expected it to. After dessert, when the room started thinning and the servers cleared the plates, I found him in the study. "Dad, can I talk to you for a second?" He was swirling brandy by the fireplace, already half-tuned out. "Make it quick, Malis. We're down a valet." I stepped closer, heart thudding. "I got accepted into the Whitmore Fellowship. It's in Cambridge." "England?" "No, Massachusetts. Finance and data science. They chose 10 students nationally." He sipped his drink. No reaction. "It's fully funded," I added. "They even give a stipend. I'd like your support." He blinked once, then set his glass down, walked over, and took the letter from my hand. I thought maybe he'd read it, maybe even smile. Instead, he laughed. "A girl," he said, shaking his head. "Finance and analytics? What's next? Your brother cooking dinner?" My stomach dropped. "Dad!" He held the letter up between 2 fingers and ripped it, clean down the center. My breath caught in my throat. "You'll be married in 5 years," he said, dropping the pieces into the fireplace. "And Paul needs that money. You don't need an empire to raise children." I just stood there, couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. He poured himself another drink, muttering, "Be grateful we even let you into the company kitchen?" My mother had been standing in the doorway. I'd felt her before I saw her. I looked at her, pleading without words. She turned her gaze to the window and said nothing, not a whisper of protest, not a look of defense, just silence, and somehow that cut deeper than the sound of paper tearing. I left the study quietly, brushing past her, holding the corners of my vision together so the tears wouldn't spill until I was safe. Upstairs, the hallway lights cast a warm glow on portraits of men, Hargrave men. My father, his father, Paul. No women, not even our mother. At the end of the hall, past Paul's suite with the carved oak doors and private bath, I climbed the narrow steps to the attic. My room smelled faintly of cedar and old quilts. The walls slanted with the roofline, and when it rained, I could hear every drop. I sat on the edge of my small twin bed, hands trembling. In the bottom drawer of my dresser, beneath a worn stack of childhood journals and one lonely bracelet, I found the bird clip. It was silver, a little tarnished, shaped like a sparrow in mid-flight. My mother had given it to me on my 13th birthday, handed quietly over breakfast with a whispered, "Don't tell your father." Back then, it felt like hope, like maybe she saw me. I held it now, the hinge still working, wings still intact. Funny how something so delicate could outlast everything else. I whispered, "Maybe I'll fly anyway." Outside, the last of the gala laughter faded, and I sat there in the quiet, not crying. For the first time in my life, I didn't cry. I planned. The clip stayed in my pocket the entire ride into Boston. I didn't touch it, didn't need to. Its jagged wing had already done its job, pierced through every illusion I had about where I stood in my family. 2 weeks had passed since that night at the Hargrave estate. No one had spoken of what happened, not my father, not my mother. Paul didn't even bother sending one of his usual smug texts. Silence in our family meant business as usual, and business apparently didn't include me, but I was done waiting for permission to exist. I stepped out of the cab in front of Martian Holdings just after 8 a.m., coat buttoned up to my throat, hair pulled back. A light breeze off the Charles River cut through the early spring air, but inside me, something was warming. The kind of slow heat that builds when a match doesn't flare, but simmers. The building looked the same as I remembered it from my internship the summer prior: sleek steel, glass too clean to touch, receptionists in heels too sharp to smile. I nodded at the security desk and gave my name. My badge was ready. They were expecting Melis Hargrave operations rotation. I was expected to observe, assist, nod politely. They had no idea I held something in my handbag that could wipe that smug smirk off Paul's face for good. 2 days after my father tore up my acceptance letter, I found the contract, tucked deep in a file of estate records my late grandfather had left me, a sealed clause signed in 2011, naming me as a 17% silent shareholder in Martian Holdings. It had never been activated. No one but the firm's founding legal team and a notary in Wellesley even knew it existed. Not my father, certainly not Paul, and I wasn't about to change that, yet. I stepped into the elevator with 3 others in stiff blazers, each one glued to their phones. No one looked up. Good. Let them underestimate me. On the 17th floor, I stepped into the operations wing and right into Paul. "Hey, look who made it out of the kitchen," he said, grinning like he'd just spotted a waitress who'd wandered into the boardroom. I didn't flinch. "Good morning, Paul." He raised an eyebrow, clearly thrown by my tone. Then, just as quickly, he recovered. "Dad says you'll be shadowing ops this quarter. You know, spreadsheets, vendor calls, stuff you can't mess up." He didn't wait for my response, just dropped a stack of folders onto the desk beside mine and strutted off toward the partner suite where he absolutely did not belong. I didn't answer. Not then. The next few days passed in a slow crawl of polite meetings, inventory audits, and relearning the power dynamics of the building. Paul had been given the title junior partner barely a month after finishing undergrad. I watched him present half-baked reports in team meetings and take credit for ideas whispered by more experienced staff. No one challenged him, not directly. Most didn't even look surprised. That was the worst part. By Friday, I was leading a small mentorship initiative, an internal project our grandfather had once designed for underrepresented hires. It was supposed to be my chance to build something. I poured everything I had into it. Anonymized performance reviews, team pairing algorithms, even budget reallocations. It wasn't about power. It was about proving that I could drive value. Quietly, strategically. That afternoon, I stayed late to clean up a report. Around 6:30 p.m., I stepped into the hallway to print some last documents, and that's when I heard him. Paul's voice floated down the corridor from an open conference room. He was on the phone. "She's not a leadership type," he said. "I mean, come on, you've seen her. Overthinks everything, no instinct. I'd suggest redirecting those mentorship funds toward real potential." There was a pause. Then he laughed. "Of course I've got this. She's family, but that doesn't mean she belongs at the top." I didn't move, didn't breathe, just let the ink of his words stain whatever part of me still thought I could play fair. When he hung up, I walked in. He froze, just for a second, then leaned against the table like nothing had happened. "Eavesdropping, sis?" "I was working." He smirked. "Right. Working? That's cute." I didn't raise my voice. "You tried to kill a project you didn't understand, just to get ahead." He shrugged. "No, I tried to protect the firm from a vanity experiment. You're not built for this, Melis. You don't have the edge. And deep down, you know that." His eyes narrowed. "Did you really think you could outrun the rules of this family?" Something in me shifted then. Not broke. Shifted. Like a lens sliding into focus. I didn't answer him. I didn't need to. That night, back at my apartment, I sat on the floor with the sealed envelope in my lap. I ran my thumb over the signature of my grandfather, his crooked, stubborn cursive etched into the paper like a whisper from someone who once believed in me, who saw me. Inside was the document that would make the entire executive team pause. It would force them to reckon with me, with my presence, my name. I thought about submitting it, about walking in Monday and dropping it on the legal desk like a gauntlet, but that would make me equal in title, not in respect, and I didn't want equality handed to me. I wanted proof that I could earn it, outthink them, outbuild them. So I slid the contract back into the fireproof box and decided I wouldn't walk in as a shareholder. Not yet. I'd walk in as a storm no one saw coming. I set the fireproof box back beneath the floorboard, careful not to let the weight of that unsigned letter pull me down with it. The silence in my apartment was thick, heavier than usual. I stood up slowly, walked toward the kitchen, and poured a glass of water I barely touched. That night, I didn't sleep. I watched the streetlights shift across my ceiling and told myself, timing is everything, especially when everyone thinks you're no one. 3 months passed like that. I showed up at Marchand Holdings every morning at 7:55 a.m., 5 minutes before the doors unlocked. I took the corner cubicle nobody wanted, right across from the printer that groaned like a dying animal, and I worked. I never corrected people when they called me Paul's team assistant. I never brought up the fact that half of his proposals were rewrites of my drafts, but people notice things, quietly. Samantha Baird, one of the senior analysts, started looping me into her weekly review meetings. "You catch things others don't," she murmured once, not looking up from her spreadsheet. Then there was Dinesh, a senior advisor who left little sticky notes on my desk with a single word: good eye, clean logic, or sometimes just a check mark. I saved every one of them, not for flattery, for proof. I was building something, whether the firm acknowledged it or not. Paul, of course, didn't notice any of that. He still strutted through the office like it was a private stage show. At 24, he wore arrogance like cologne, loud, cloying, inescapable. Every time he dropped a folder on my desk, I'd hear him behind me, talking to the other guys about expanding into fintech, as if the words tasted expensive. March rolled in with its damp chill, and with it came the Hargrave Winter Gala. That morning, I dressed in charcoal gray, not out of modesty, but purpose. In a room full of shimmer, I didn't want to blend in. I wanted to disappear just enough to be underestimated. It was held at the estate, same as always. Hargrave House, with its giant glass conservatory and white-gloved servers pretending they didn't hear board members gossiping about each other's divorces. I arrived an hour early to help with logistics. That's code for stacking brochures, adjusting table numbers, and making sure the elder Hargraves remembered where the restrooms were. No one asked me to do it. No one thanked me either. But I didn't care. I'd learned that being useful made you invisible, but invisibility had its own kind of power. The first sign of trouble came halfway through the evening. Champagne flutes clinked. A string quartet hummed something tasteful. Then I heard my father's voice boom across the marble hall. "We're thrilled to announce our upcoming expansion, spearheaded by Paul. Bold vision truly. Just wait till you see what he's cooking with our R&D budget." I blinked. That project wasn't his. It was mine. I'd written the initial brief, sourced the data, built the forecast deck by hand over Thanksgiving weekend while he was in Aspen unwinding. Paul had rejected the idea outright in November, said it was too granular, and now, this? I stepped toward the stage instinctively, my mouth opened before I even formed the sentence, but a hand reached out and touched mine, light, but firm. My mother. She was smiling, composed. Her eyes didn't match the warmth of her lipstick. "Let them have this," she whispered, pressing my fingers down. "It's better this way. Paul needs it more." I froze, not because I agreed, but because something broke in me right then, not loudly, not dramatically, just a clean, deep crack, the kind that doesn't show until it's too late to fix. Later that evening, Walter, my father, held court at the donor table. He was 3 drinks in, his tie askew, voice louder than necessary. "I've always said," he chuckled, glancing toward the board, "daughters are lovely, but sons build legacies." Laughter erupted. I stood there, wine glass in hand, my fingers wrapped tightly around the stem like it was a lifeline. I smiled. Then I set it down gently. I walked out through the east veranda before dessert was served. The air outside bit at my skin, but I didn't flinch. I drove home without turning on the radio, just the hum of the tires and the occasional ache rising in my throat. But I didn't let it spill over. I wouldn't give them that. Not anymore. Back inside my apartment, I toed off my heels, shrugged off the blazer, and pulled the fireproof box from beneath the floorboards again. I didn't hesitate this time. I flipped open the sealed contract, slid out the attached document I'd drafted months earlier and added something new, a formal request to exercise my shareholder rights, with a list of provisions. I signed it, but I didn't send it. Not yet. I needed one more card on the table, and I knew they'd deal it to me themselves without ever realizing it. The next morning, I woke before the sun. My coffee was still too hot to sip when I opened my inbox and saw the subject line that changed everything. Internal Ledger Access, Authorized Entities Only. It was a routine CC, I shouldn't have been on it, but someone must have clicked the wrong malus in the address book. I stared at the email for a long minute. Inside the thread, a mid-level compliance officer was requesting temporary access to 2 restricted portfolios for financial partner verification. That wasn't unusual. What was unusual? The accounts listed, Portfolio C and Portfolio J, both listed under Paul's jurisdiction, with quarterly sign-offs bearing his initials. A few quiet clicks later, I was in the document viewer. The transactions weren't dramatic, no red flags for someone scanning totals, but the decimal placements caught my eye. Rounding discrepancies, duplicate vendor codes, a pattern too symmetrical to be accidental. I didn't breathe for several seconds. That night, I skipped dinner. I sat with my laptop and a notepad and began digging, line by line, month by month. The funds marked as community reinvestment had been routed, then rerouted, then pooled into 3 obscure LLCs. 2 were dead ends. The third, it led me to a modest building registered under a company called Nori Pine Partners, the owner on file, Colin Regan. I hadn't heard that name in years, but Paul used to room with him at Dartmouth. I remembered his laugh, sharp and fake, like a politician trying to sell you bad coffee. He once told me, "Some people are born to manage money, others just wear suits." Back then, I didn't know how to respond. Now, I did. By midnight, I had drafted 3 pages of notes, cross-referenced every transfer, and highlighted the weeks where Paul had made unusually large cash withdrawals that conveniently lined up with conference travel. At 2:07 a.m., I called it. I knew enough. I printed everything, not for revenge, not yet, for clarity. The next morning, I brought the files to someone I trusted, Tamara Engel, a senior compliance officer who'd once pulled me aside after a boardroom meeting and whispered, "You see more than they think, don't you?" She met me in the side hallway near the break room, away from the glass walls and predictable eyes. I slid the folder to her. No small talk. She flipped through 3 pages before pausing. "Melis," she said softly, "this isn't just sloppiness." "I know." "If you push this up, it won't stop it, Paul. You'll ignite the whole chain, the board, your father, maybe your mother too." I stared at the marble floor. Then it was already broken. I'm not the one who shattered it. Tamara looked at me for a long second, nodded, and tucked the folder under her arm. You didn't print your name on these. No, I said, I didn't. She walked off without another word. For the rest of the day, I went back to work like nothing had changed. I replied to budget emails, updated a Q2 roadmap, ate lunch at my desk. No one saw the shift, except me. And that was enough. That night, after I fed the cat and poured myself a second cup of tea, I sat back down and opened a blank draft in Outlook. To Paul Marchand. Subject, Re-Strategy, Q1 message. Check Portfolio C, Column E. I didn't sign it. I didn't need to. I hovered over Send for one heartbeat. Then I clicked. Less than an hour later, the hallway outside my office erupted with fast, heavy footsteps. My door slammed open so hard a pen rolled off my desk. Paul stood in the doorway, eyes bloodshot, tie loosened, folder clutched in one fist like he wanted to hurl it through the wall. You think you're clever? He tossed the file onto my desk. Pages fluttered out, sliding toward my keyboard. You really want to start a war? With me? You have no idea what you're walking into. I didn't flinch. I folded my hands, leaned back slightly, and looked him in the eye. You came in here, not me. He stared at me for 3 more seconds, breathing hard. Then he spun around and slammed the door so hard the blinds rattled. I didn't move, because what he didn't know was that Tamara had already left her office hours ago and left the file neatly on a board member's desk. I didn't linger after Paul's outburst. The building was still humming with end-of-day chatter, lights flickering off floor by floor. I walked straight past the glass walls of legal, past the polished elevator bays, and down to the parking deck, feeling the heat still rising off his handprint on the office door. I spent the next 2 days in a kind of autopilot, working from home, organizing what I knew, updating the encrypted drive Ms. Estrada had whispered about long ago. The one we were both too cautious to ever acknowledge until now. Then came Thursday. It was our weekly executive sync. Standard, recurring, agenda always vague. But as I walked into the boardroom, something felt off. The air was stale. The usual buzz of pre-meeting chatter wasn't there. Instead, they were already seated, tight-lipped. My uncle, Harold, sat at the head, though I was technically the acting lead strategist. Paul was beside him, flipping through a binder that hadn't been circulated. I slid into my seat. What's going on? Harold cleared his throat. Before we begin, there's a matter we need to vote on. It's been proposed that, to preserve neutrality during the audit process, your role be temporarily restructured. Temporarily restructured, I repeated slowly. Paul folded his hands. You'd still retain a consulting capacity, but day-to-day operations, it's just cleaner this way. Clean. That's what they called cutting off your hands while smiling in your face. I looked down the table, faces I'd worked alongside for years. Some looked away, some stared straight ahead, and some, like Aunt Laurel, didn't even blink. This wasn't on the agenda, I said. This isn't protocol. Harold nodded once. And yet, the motion stands. They voted. I didn't speak. I didn't raise my hand. But they did. 1 by 1. 6 in favor. 2 abstained, none opposed. My seat hadn't even cooled before a memo landed in staff inboxes, leadership realignment, strategic transition, and a brief but glossy paragraph about Paul spearheading product innovation across multiple verticals. I hadn't even taken a breath when my phone buzzed again. Marchand Holdings announces leadership evolution to navigate new market frontiers. There it was, a press release, carefully timed, well-crafted. I clicked the link. It featured Paul's photo next to a summary of product milestones. Every one of them mine. No mention of my name. I left my coffee untouched and made my way upstairs to the communications floor. Tammy from PR gave me that tight corporate smile when I stepped into the bullpen. Oh, hey, Malis. Crazy day, huh? I held up my phone. You sent this out? She didn't look at the screen. It came from upstairs. Family directive. You know I wrote the design specs on the modular rollout? That wasn't Paul's work. She shifted uncomfortably. Look, I'm not trying to get in the middle. You already are. No one else said anything. Just keyboards clicking, eyes carefully averted. I left the floor in silence. Back at my office, I swiped my keycard. Nothing. Again, nothing. I tried the handle. Locked. That's when it clicked. This wasn't about neutrality. It was erasure. I walked around to the open plan East Wing. The new hire bulletin board had been refreshed, with Team Innovation updated. My face had been replaced. So had my team's. They didn't even send a courtesy email. I took the elevator to archives. Most people didn't even know that subfloor existed, but I did. And Ms. Estrada was waiting. "Word travels faster than memos," she said, her voice low. She walked me to the back into a secured records alcove and closed the door behind us. She handed me a flash drive. "What's this?" "Everything they think they've hidden, original patents, drafts, email threads, before they scrubbed your name." I blinked, surprised. "Why?" She hesitated, then, "Because you made things better, not bigger, better, and I know what they're doing is wrong." I nodded slowly, unsure how to respond. "You'll want to keep it," she said again, "for when you tell your side." I left that night through the side lobby. No goodbyes, no final box of belongings, just a purse slung over my shoulder, and a flash drive in my pocket. I left the building with nothing in my hands, but more power than they thought. The air outside Marchand's headquarters was cold for late spring, but I didn't pull my coat tighter. I walked past the line of black cars, past the glass doors that once opened automatically for me. I didn't look back. There was no point. 6 weeks later, I found myself driving along the tree-lined back road toward the Hargrave estate. The gravel crunched under the tires like a slow drum roll, warning me that I didn't belong here anymore, but I hadn't come for permission. My father's 70th birthday was never meant to be small. Strings of imported lights hung over the garden terrace. The driveway had more luxury vehicles than a country club. Waitstaff in black uniforms floated between guests, offering drinks and polite nods. I didn't RSVP. I just walked through the front gate, past startled glances and half-remembered smiles. A few heads turned, a few whispers followed, but no one stopped me. Inside the main hall, Paul was already holding court near the fireplace, brandy in hand, voice carrying. "We've transitioned beautifully," he said to a ring of aging investors. "Stability is everything after disruption." Disruption? That's what they were calling it now. My mother saw me as I approached the table. Her eyes locked onto mine for half a second, then drifted over my shoulder like she hadn't seen anything at all. "Melis," she said with a nod. Her voice was flat. No warmth, no curiosity. Just obligation. "Mother," I replied. I didn't expect a hug. The dinner moved on around me like I was a shadow seated at the edge of something that used to be mine. Paul toasted our father's visionary leadership and the next chapter for Hargrave legacy. I sat there, untouched wineglass in hand, carving my salmon with the precision of someone imagining cutting through something else. No one asked me how I was. No one asked anything. After the dessert, something artisanal and overwrought, I stood to leave quietly, but I hadn't taken 3 steps when a hand touched my elbow. "Ms. Marchand?" It was Theodore Lane, the family's longtime legal advisor. He was aging into his suits now, soft around the edges, but still as discreet as ever. "There's something you should see," he murmured, motioning toward the side corridor. We stepped into my grandfather's old study. The walls still smelled faintly of cigars and cedar. Lane closed the door behind us and handed me a manila envelope, thick, sealed. My name was handwritten across the front. "I wasn't supposed to hold this long," he said, "but given recent events..." I opened it carefully. Inside was a notarized copy of my grandfather's final amendment to the Hargrave Trust, dated just 2 months before he passed, signed, stamped, binding. It granted me full controlling interest in the Hargrave estate, including the original 20% founding stake in Marchand Holdings. I blinked, rereading the paragraph again and again. There was no ambiguity. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" I asked, my voice low. Lane looked regretful. He said you'd find out when you were ready, or when they pushed too far. He didn't need to explain who they were. I left the study, letter in hand, folded into my coat like a secret too heavy to carry. But before I could leave, I saw her, my mother, standing by the gallery window, sipping tea like nothing had happened. She turned when she sensed me. "You knew," I said simply. She didn't flinch. "I suspected. Your grandfather mentioned possibilities, but he never confirmed details." I stepped closer. "But you knew something. You knew he was protecting me." Her eyes flickered. "I didn't stop him," she said slowly, "but I didn't help either." I searched her face. "Why?" There was a pause. Then the smallest, saddest smile I'd ever seen from her. "Because I thought if you got too strong, you'd leave us. And I wasn't ready to be left behind." I wanted to say something cruel, something final. But I just stood there, the words caught in my chest like thorns. Instead, I nodded once and walked past her. Outside, the night was still and heavy. The moon cast long silver shadows on the lawn. I didn't stop to say goodbye to Paul, or my father, or anyone who had clapped while I was being erased. I didn't slam the door behind me when I left, but something in me had already closed, forever. I didn't look back. I didn't have to. The weight I'd carried for decades, the quiet craving for acknowledgement, for decency, had shifted, and something hollow in me had finally filled with silence, but not the kind that submits, the kind that sharpens. It was 1 week later when the storm began. I was rinsing out my coffee cup in the kitchen when my phone rang. Boston number I didn't recognize. I usually let those go to voicemail, but something in me answered. "Ms. Hargrave," the woman's voice said, tight with interest. "I'm with Channel 12. We're running a piece on the recent embezzlement allegations involving the Marchand Family Trust. Would you like to comment on your involvement?" I froze mid-reach for the dish towel. "I'm sorry. What allegations?" There was a pause on the line. "Your mother implied..." Well, she didn't say it outright, but we have confirmation she spoke with our senior producer off-record last week. She suggested there may have been irregularities, and that you may have had access to certain funds you weren't entitled to. Something about desperation. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. The journalist filled the silence with awkward professionalism. "Of course, we're still verifying, but since your name surfaced, well, we're giving you the chance to speak first." I thanked her. Politely, coldly, then hung up. I stood there, still holding the dripping mug, staring at the floor. The tile blurred. For a few seconds, I couldn't hear anything but my pulse. So that was it. Not Paul, not a cousin, not some bitter ex-coworker dredging up lies. My mother. She hadn't just turned her back on me. She'd turned the lens. By the time I sat down and opened my laptop, the story had already taken root. It hadn't even aired on TV yet, just snippets online, a few anonymous family sources, and vague phrases like unauthorized withdrawals and leadership crisis. But the headline read, "Heiress or Hustler, Inside the Trust Trouble at Marchand Holdings," and right under it, my face. Not my professional headshot, not the one from the conference last year where I'd spoken on succession ethics. No, they'd used a cropped photo from Paul's engagement party, one where I was looking down, mid-blink, caught off guard, like I had something to hide. That evening, Paul went on TV. "It's painful," he said, voice rich with condescension, "when family fractures under pressure. I just pray we can get through this as a unit." He knew exactly what he was doing. Feigning grace while quietly stabbing between the ribs. The world didn't care that the story was thin, that it didn't make sense, that I had never once signed a check without audit or touched the trust. Rumor didn't need foundation, just fuel. I tried to call my mother. It rang 3 times before going to voicemail. I didn't bother leaving a message. Instead, I opened the small drawer beside my desk, the one that still smelled like sandalwood and ink. I pulled out the flash drive. It was black, smooth, unremarkable, except for a faint scratch across one side. I remembered the night I backed everything up. The meeting notes, the original project designs, the quarterly reports. The proof. Not just that I'd done my job, but that Paul and 2 board members had erased my records post-removal. They'd rewritten history, but I'd kept receipts. I didn't run to the press, didn't write a blog post or set up a dramatic camera monologue like some people might. That's not who I am. That's never been who I am. Instead, I got dressed, threw on a coat, and walked down to a small cafe on Tremont Street. Same spot I used to go to with my old mentor, Doreen, back when I thought integrity was the family business. I ordered chamomile, sat at a quiet table by the window. Then I took a picture. Just the flash drive, on the marble table, no caption explaining anything, just 2 words typed above it and posted straight to my public account. I kept receipts. By the time I walked back to my apartment, my phone was vibrating nonstop. Some people laughed at the post, some ridiculed me, but some paused. And then the tide started shifting. A niche tech blog caught the image first, recognized the flash drive brand from a discontinued Vault model used in corporate compliance. Then someone at a legal journal reposted it, speculating the drive could hold unaltered contracts. Within hours, threads began flying, old interns of mine sharing anecdotes, snippets of presentation slides with my name scrubbed from the bottom. This was her project. She led this deal. I remember she worked 18-hour days building this division. And then came Doreen. She quote-tweeted the image with 5 words that made me sit down on the edge of my bed and just breathe. They stole what she built. That was it. That was all she wrote. And the noise that followed wasn't chaotic. It was focused, like 1,000 voices realigning at once. Quiet at first, then louder. Not pity, not outrage, recognition. I didn't have to explain myself. I didn't have to perform. I never had to shout. The truth made its own noise, once it was unchained. I didn't speak as I walked through the sliding glass doors of Marchand Holdings. I didn't need to. The silence that followed me down that long hallway said everything. The receptionist stiffened slightly. 2 junior analysts in the corner lowered their voices mid-conversation, and as I passed the framed portrait of my father in the lobby, I felt no nostalgia, only resolve. The elevator ride up was quiet. Just me, my thoughts, and the slim leather folder resting on my lap. It held no vengeance, just truth, bound in black and white. Years of being overlooked, misattributed, erased, distilled down into timestamps, clauses, and signatures they had forgotten I still had. By the time the elevator doors opened onto the executive floor, I already knew this wouldn't be a confrontation. It would be a correction. The emergency board meeting had been called under the guise of strategic realignment, but the air inside that room told a different story. Tension clung like humidity before a storm. Half the board members glanced away as I entered. Paul sat at the head of the table, tapping his pen, eyes flicking over me as if assessing my worth. Again. I didn't bother with greetings. I walked to the far end of the conference table and stood beside General Counsel, Mr. Dwyer. I placed the folder down carefully, like a surgeon laying out instruments before a procedure, and opened it. These, I said, are the original IP filings for Project Helix, time-stamped before they were stripped from our system. These are the financial logs showing funds rerouted through shell subsidiaries, each traced back to accounts Paul oversaw. And this, I tapped a sealed envelope with the trust's insignia, is the amendment clause my father placed in the trust, granting me voting power if mismanagement is detected. Dwyer didn't blink. He simply reached for the envelope and opened it with the kind of reverence usually reserved for verdicts or final words. The room fell utterly still. Paul let out a soft scoff. "This isn't how things work, Malus. You can't just show up after a media frenzy and—" "I'm invoking my rights," I said calmly. "As majority trust beneficiary and minority shareholder with voting power, I am calling for a board vote to suspend Paul Marchand, pending full financial and ethical review." No theatrics, no voice raised. The silence stretched. And then, slowly, hands lifted. 1, 2, 3, 5. It wasn't unanimous, it didn't have to be. Paul stared at them. "You're all just going to roll over because she showed you a folder?" "No," said Dwyer without looking at him, "because she showed us the truth." A brief silence followed before Paul shoved his chair back. "This is a circus," he muttered. "It's a family firm, not a courtroom." And then I turned toward the far end of the table, toward my mother. She hadn't spoken once since I entered. She sat in her usual posture, stiff, hands folded, still wearing pearls like armor, as if her decorum would protect her from what was coming. "You tried to erase me," I said, not loud, but direct. Her lips parted. For a moment, she looked more like someone's scared daughter than my mother. "I didn't want you to destroy what we built," she said, voice barely audible. I met her eyes. "Then you should have protected me." She didn't respond. Dwyer stood then and turned to two security staff already waiting at the door. A silent nod. They approached her gently. No force, no drama. Just quiet instruction. She looked at me once more before standing, more slowly than usual, like the weight of everything she had tried to control was finally pressing back. And then she was gone. When the doors closed behind her, the silence didn't feel tense anymore. It felt clean. I stayed for another 15 minutes, answering legal questions, confirming I wouldn't take over as interim CEO. That wasn't the goal. Then I walked out, not through the executive hallway, but through the front lobby. Past the analysts, past the interns, past the young women in cardigans and ponytails who didn't know yet how easily they could be erased. Back home, I sat at the kitchen table. No TV, just the glow of my laptop. I opened a new document. At the top, I typed, "To the daughters they underestimated." I listed every name I'd fought beside. The interns who were told to let the men lead. The analysts who brought fresh algorithms and never got credit. The quiet women who worked late and never raised their hands. And then, for the first time in years, I signed my name with pride beneath something that truly belonged to me. I didn't want revenge, I wanted repair. But repair sometimes begins with removal. I didn't wait for applause. I didn't expect grace. But when the elevator doors closed behind me that morning, 3 weeks after the board meeting, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Stillness. The kind that doesn't demand you defend your right to breathe. I sat at my desk at Marchand, my name now engraved into the brass plate by the window, the same plate that used to bear his. The sunlight came in slanted, soft, and the room smelled faintly of cedar and warm paper. It was quiet, and for once it wasn't threatening. The folders had been cleared, no spreadsheets, no flash drives left open, humming with tension. Just a yellow notepad and a capped pen beside my cup of lukewarm tea. I didn't touch either. I didn't need to. I used to rehearse everything, every sentence, every breath, as if a single pause might give someone room to cut in, correct me, tell me I misunderstood my own worth. But now, I didn't owe the room anything, not even my voice. And in that silence I finally realized I wasn't chasing legacy anymore. I was the legacy. That afternoon, I reached for the one thing I'd been putting off. A letter. Not one for lawyers or reporters, not for board members or even my so-called family, just for me. I wrote slowly. No drafting, no edits. I let the words fall the way they always should have. They told me I wasn't the kind of daughter men invested in, said I needed to wait my turn, to smile more, to learn my place in the family. I paused, let my pen hover. So I did. I waited. I smiled. I swallowed their silence like it was grace. Another line formed, sharp and clean. They weaponized my patience and mistook it for absence. I kept going, line after line, until my hand ached. But here's what they never counted on. I learned to speak without raising my voice. I learned to wait without disappearing. And I learned how to walk away when staying meant betrayal. I signed it simply. They tried to write me out, but I learned to write myself in. I folded the page and slipped it into the bottom drawer, locked it, not to hide it, but to let it rest. 3 days later, I took the morning off. No suit, no makeup, Just jeans, a coat, and a scarf I hadn't worn in years, the one he gave me when I graduated from college, back before anything had broken. The cemetery was quiet, overgrown in places, like time had started to forget the names on the stones. I found his plot, Row D, Stone 17, my grandfather. I didn't say anything. What was left to say? Instead, I placed the company trust key, heavy, still warm from my hand, and the flash drive with the original patents on the bench beside his headstone. "You gave me tools," I whispered. "I finally used them." I stood there another moment, then turned and walked away. Not bitter, just done. 2 weeks passed. Then, quietly, with no press release or gala, I launched a new division of Marchand, one dedicated to women-led ventures in overlooked towns, places like the one I grew up in, places like the one my mother avoided in every conversation. It started with just 2 hires, a grant specialist from Milwaukee and a startup founder from Shreveport who'd been turned down 23 times. By month's end, we had 10 applications, then 40, then 300. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I was standing in someone else's shadow trying to grow something that didn't belong to me. My name was on the masthead now, not in a corner, not beneath anyone's. It wasn't shouted in some press announcement or stitched onto a photo op. It was there because I put it there, and nobody could take it off. Do you think I should have shouted sooner? Or were they always going to hear me, only after I stopped speaking to please them? Because sometimes the loudest answer is silence that doesn't return.